Hey, welcome back to another episode of Keeping Cozy. Today we're speaking with billionaire venture capitalist Tim Draper. He's known for a slew of big investments, but right now he's most famous for his work in Bitcoin. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this conversation, and be sure to check out our other content. Thanks for your time, and I hope you enjoy watching. Thank you for coming on the podcast, and I think it's a really good time to have you on considering the election and the Bitcoin prices that have been happening recently.
Terrific. Yeah, thanks for having me on this show. Yeah, I think the election has created an interesting opportunity. I think it's going to change, it's going to accelerate our move toward being a global society. I think Biden is more open to reaching across borders, and I think that will help us move anthropologically. I mean, we've always been tribal and we've always been tied to geographic borders. But then the internet opened up our worlds and our eyes toward a free market that could spread everywhere. And that free market is a weave of different people and products and services, and they all help each other. And everybody gets wealthier. Everybody's better fed, better clothed, better sheltered because we're all a part of this woven fabric. Yeah. And when you start putting trade barriers down, that hurts the fabric. Yeah. It hurts both sides of that fabric. And so I think if Biden starts spreading an olive branch around the world, we're going to move toward that open global society where the geographic borders mean less, and governments have to compete for us. They have to provide better services, or we'll move. You might be in one place, I might be in another, but we don't really know where each other are. We could be anywhere.
And
so we will be in effect customers. Citizens of the world will be customers of governance providers. And I think that's coming. And that's going to be pretty interesting. And you mentioned Bitcoin. It's interesting. COVID made it so people decided to start experimenting. And so we saw a lot more Bitcoin wallets come to the fore. And now people are trading in Bitcoin much more easily. Now it's, in fact, if I had to send you money right now, it'd be a lot easier for me to send it in Bitcoin than to send it in dollars.
Yeah.
And it'd be more secure. So I think there is a much better, Bitcoin's just a better solution. Yeah. And the fiat currencies are going to have more and more trouble trying to compete with a currency that is significantly better. It's global, it's open, it's transparent.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be an interesting time.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to talk to you a little bit more about Bitcoin, but more towards the second half of the podcast. I want to start by getting to know a little bit more about your roots, a little bit about the Drapers in Silicon Valley and a short bit about your career. And I would love if you could touch on Stanford, the game, because I thought that was really cool.
Great. Yeah, my grandfather was the first Silicon Valley venture capitalist. So and then my dad was a great pioneer of venture capital. And so I have it in my blood. And my children, 3 of my children are venture capitalists now. And Jesse works at Halogen Ventures, only backing women. Adam works at Boost VC, he backs sci-fi. And Billy works at Path Ventures, and he backs consumer opportunities and marketplaces. And so we have a family of venture capitalists that's been a big part of our lives. And then Stanford the Game was a game I created with Heidi Roizen when we were getting out of Stanford. And we modeled it after a game called Careers. And and people had to vie for resume stars and units and social points as they went around the board. And then, as I remember, we went after a couple of things. One was cure death.
Yeah.
People are getting closer and closer to. One was colonize Mars, which people are
Yeah.
getting closer and closer to. Um, the other two I don't remember, but I think we had sort of fundamental. We had a fundamental vision in Stanford the Game, and Heidi's gone off to. She came to work with me at DFJ, and now she works there, and so she became a venture capitalist too. She was an entrepreneur, became a venture capitalist, and we've kept good. We've been
Yeah.
buddies ever since.
And just a little bit about, your career for some people who may not know, as much.
Okay, well, after Stanford the Game, I sold oysters door to door for a while. I worked for Schlumberger Oil in at a rig in El Tigre, Venezuela. Um, I sold apples when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Uh,
I read up on that. Yeah.
yeah,
My mom took the
I
$4.
yeah, they took the money. The
Yeah.
woman took the money. She thought she was being fair. She was being a socialist. Um, and then we when I got out of Stanford as an electrical engineer, I went and joined Hewlett Packard as a computer support engineer, a marketing person, and worked international. And working international then was you had to make several trips to the location before any kind of relationship could be built. The internet really changed all that.
Yeah.
And then I went back to the Harvard Business School, and then came back to the Silicon Valley with Alex Brown and Sons, and worked there as both a venture capitalist and an investment banker.
Yeah.
And then I spun out and levered up. I set up I reset an SBIC, renamed and reset an SBIC that had some value in it, and I was able to borrow $6 million against it. And that was the beginning of the money that I used to build my record.
Yeah.
And then that record didn't look too good after year 3, but after year 4, all of a sudden, the IPO window opened up, much like it is now, and we had 5 IPOs, and it was a big success. And I went from being on the SBIC's watch list to their dirt list.
Yeah.
And then I was, then they put my picture on the wall as venture capitalist of the year because all those companies went public, and I was able to pay them all back and everything.
Yeah.
And then that built my record, and I brought John Fisher in to join me for my second fund. And he had worked with me at Alex Brown, and the two of us invested another fund, did very well, discovered the internet. We brought in Steve Jurvetson, and the three of us then had two really extraordinary funds together. And then we build up a big partnership, 10, 12 partners. And I realized that you really need centralized decision-making in venture capital. And so I went solo again. And in going solo, I restarted Draper Associates, and then I built out Draper University. I made the big Bitcoin purchase, and made some investments in some companies that became incredibly successful.
Yeah.
And so going solo was an amazingly good financial decision for me.
Yeah.
And the other guys did very well too. They all, by spinning out sort of 3 rockets out of one, our team generally did very well.
Yeah, yeah. So the next question I want to ask is, privilege is a word that, is used a lot on college campuses today. And as you mentioned, you kind of had a lot of, connections that came from your family when you came into venture capital. But then you also, I don't know if you've ever heard of Stanford professor Tina Seelig, but she did a, project on the $5 experiment where she gave, three of her.
Yeah, of course.
So the $5 experiment, I wrote an article on it where it shows the price of privilege, where your assets can help prevent you from seeing the most creative solution. So could you talk a little bit about your reaction to the word privilege?
Oh, great. Yeah. I think if, I don't think my grandfather was the first venture capitalist. That was, that was, and then my dad was a pioneer. They kind of had arrows in their back. Their businesses went up and down and up and down.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the venture business that it is today. And when I went into the venture business, it was still pretty early. Some of the returns were starting to come in. The computer industry was starting to get ready, starting to get going. I guess I had the privilege of having a great dad and a great mom and two great grandfathers, who all were sort of hardworking, pioneering spirits, entrepreneurs. And it set the tone for me to be more entrepreneurial, to start something, to grow something. I got into some of the best schools in the world. And so I got incredibly well educated. Of course, I still think education is way behind where it should be.
Yeah.
And I think I still very much believe in the American dream, that you can start from the bottom and free yourself and go do anything you want to do.
Yeah.
And I think if people feel like they're privileged, they will lose that entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
And they'll feel like they don't want to lose the money that was made for them. And so they basically blow it by not taking risks. They blow it. And I think that's what you were getting at. I think having the freedom to, when your back's against the wall, you can be the most creative.
Yeah.
But having, just thinking of money as a vehicle toward your future, rather than something you got to hold on to, is a much better way to go. I think you've got to look at money as a resource that you have. You have your brain, you have your body, it can move, you have your people, you have the books you've read, you have the understanding of software and the internet and whatever else. Those are all things that those are all your tools. And the money can come and go, and it has.
Yeah.
I've had big years where it was extraordinary, and really bad years where we pretty much lost. We went very low. Didn't lose everything, but went very low. Year 2000 and 2001, I remember facing my limited partners, and they were not happy. They were, and I remember when I had to convince the SBIC that that they wouldn't call my loan because they were going to call my loan.
Yeah.
And I think everybody's going to go through periods where they feel very rich and they feel very poor, and each of those periods they're going to have to adjust. And when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And I think that makes a big difference. The other thing is, for the people who feel that they didn't have privilege and they can't get there, it reminds me of that quote: if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
I think if you think you can, you'll get there.
yeah.
If you think you can't, you won't.
Yeah.
Um, Pessimists never get there. Optimists always get there.
Yeah.
Optimists go through a lot of failure in order to get there, but they do get there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, kind of, to go a little bit more to your specific role, as a venture capitalist, you have to like, work with some of the youngest and most talented, but sometimes naive wonderkins. So I guess, what is it like when you deal with an entrepreneur who's, in their early 20s and, most of our audience is highly motivated people. I'm sure most of the people who watch your stuff are highly motivated people, but, are sometimes young and naive and need to be trained. How do you get those people to start seeing outside of their own, perhaps, filters?
Naive is a good thing. And I would encourage people to continue to be naive throughout their life. Um, Naive allows you to look at the world as it could be. It allows you to think what great things could happen in the future. And and when you get jaded, which I guess is the opposite of naive, that means you have allowed the regulations and the bureaucrats and the people who tell you no to slow you down. And that's the beginning of the end of your life.
Yeah.
So I think stay naive, keep pushing,
Yeah.
and let the bureaucrats and the rule makers catch up to you.
Yeah.
I mean, these naive guys created Facebook and Uber and Amazon and Apple, and they're all naive, and they stayed naive, and they kept thinking, what could we do now for the customer? And
Yeah.
they didn't let all those naysayers and regulators and bureaucrats tell them that they couldn't do it.
Well, when you work as them with them as like a mentor, do you have to sometimes help them, naive is one thing and I agree with you. It's usually, a good thing to have. But sometimes I think arrogance can come from, being so talented or perhaps so wealthy at such a young age.
Arrogance isn't all bad. Steve Jobs was arrogant. Travis was arrogant. Um, it's not all bad. It's a perception people use. It's a negative word, but it's a perception other people have of somebody who's confident.
Yeah.
And but if you're confident, it's good to be confident. The arrogance, I mean, if you go all the way to hubris,
Yeah.
then you start to be a problem because you think anything you do, nothing can hurt you. But having the kind of confidence that you need to grow a business, start a business, grow a business, to delight your customer, to create a product that no one's ever imagined except you, that requires some form of confidence or arrogance to get the thing done, even though everybody else thinks it's not going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, that, yeah.
so, I think you've got it right there that great entrepreneurs need real confidence. And what I say to the students at Draper University, which by the way, I recommend for all of your listeners, probably start with the online program, which is 2 weeks and $500. But we say, I will fail and fail again until I succeed. And we use the word fail on purpose because sometimes people who have really nailed it in school and they always got A's, they never made mistakes. But hey, let's face it, all the greatest companies in the world, all the greatest discoveries, those were mistakes. They
Yeah.
were just odd things that happened. So you've got to be willing to fail. You got to be willing to make mistakes. If you can't go through life thinking everything's perfect or else, because it won't be. Nothing ends up being perfect. And having the confidence to go ahead and fail, and then just pick yourself back up and fail again, is a great freeing. It's emotionally freeing. For those people who had tiger moms.
Yeah, well, kind of on that note, you talk a lot about spirituality, or at least specifically, faith in both your book, and I guess also in Draper University, from what I've heard. Do you mind talking a little bit about, the role of faith and spirituality in Silicon Valley and in just entrepreneurship in general?
I'll do it this way. Let's say I have a farm and you have a house, and we don't trade. Then I die, you die of starvation, and I die of exposure.
Yeah.
And now multiply that by the 8 billion people around the planet. They're all helping each other. Everybody is a part of this world economy that grows and moves, and it's dynamic, and it feeds people and shelters and houses people. Well, my faith is that we're all somehow interconnected. We're all a part of something bigger, and then having faith in your success. You have to have faith that what you're doing is good, and I think I say good rather than right, and because you might be wrong, but you might be doing something good. And so when I invest in companies and entrepreneurs, I always ask the question, a lot of people think about all the things that could go wrong, but if you're a girl, a guy, and a dog, a lot of things can go wrong. You're up against the world. But what I say to myself is, what if this works? What if it becomes a thing? What if these guys are right? And they are not right, but their vision comes to fruition. If their vision comes to fruition, what happens? And then I ask, is that a world I want to be a part of? Is that a good world? And then I'll fund it if I think it is. And so I think that's, and there's faith all the way across there. Now I'm going to go to after faith from another direction, and that is trust. The wealthiest countries in the world are the ones with the most trust. In fact, Singapore is a great example. Singapore was one of the poorest countries in the world, and then Lee Kuan Yew came in and he imposed trust on the country, and everybody became so trustworthy. Now it's probably the most trustworthy country in the world, and it's one of the richest. So it went from poorest to richest, from being untrustworthy to trustworthy. And you look at India way back when it was totally corrupt, a horribly corrupt country. So everybody there was always thinking, I win, you lose. They were all thinking it was a zero-sum game. But as trust is built, then you can start thinking for the long term. You can think, well, let's win together. Let's create something together. And then as that happens, things go much better. And then, some of these people start talking about how socialism is a good idea. Socialism is such a bad idea. And I'll give you an example, and that is that because socialism, they don't trust people. They're government controlled, and they don't trust people. So the best example there is Korea. Korea was split. North Korea and South Korea were split by the DMZ, demilitarized zone, after the Korean War. North Korea decided to be a socialist dictatorship. South Korea decided to be a free market economy with a democracy. and capitalism. So you had capitalism in the South and socialism in the North. Okay, the average South Korean now makes 400 times what the average North Korean makes in a year. And people say, oh, well, yeah, maybe the cost structure is different or whatever. But the average South Korean is now it's been 3 or 4 generations. The average South Korean is now 4 inches taller than the average North Korean.
Yeah.
So they eat better, they live better, they're clothed, they travel, they have a much better life. They have a spectacular life because they're a free market economy. They are a capitalist society.
Yeah.
And they're run by the people. They are run as a democracy. If you have a socialist country, no one trusts anybody. Everybody's relying on the government. The government is usually corrupt.
Yeah.
And that corruption penetrates the entire society.
Yeah.
So there's my faith. More faith, more wealth. More trust, more wealth.
Yeah.
More freedom, more wealth.
Yeah. Well, Boston College, where I, went to college and where most of the viewers and watchers of this, probably are from, is, a Catholic school, pretty religious. So I kind of want to ask one more question on faith/spirituality. And it's specifically related to the religion of Taoism, which, Jack Dorsey is apparently a Taoist, as well as Vitalik Buterin. And the 16th chapter of the Tao Te Ching says, "Woe to those who innovate while ignorant of the constant." The constant being like the Tao or, the eternal philosophy. What would you say the eternal philosophy or Tao is for you when you invest or when you see innovators?
So first, I haven't read the Tao book, and I've got it on my list. I have read the Bible, and I've read the Koran. I've read the Book of Mormon. I've read the book of the Mao's Little Red Book.
Yeah.
I've read some Hindu writings. I've read some Jewish writings. I've read lots of different religions, and they're all good.
Yeah.
And they're all trying to improve people's lives. Now, of course, people historically have been very bad with religion. They've used it for their own gain against the people. But in general, religion is a great thing, and spirituality is a great thing. And being connected with people and the universes and all that, I think, is a great idea. My Tao is, it sort of comes from 2 different places. One, the people I back have to be completely dedicated to what they're doing, and they have to be really following their life mission. And then the mission for me, I started with a mission of spreading entrepreneurship and venture capital around the world. And then when Bitcoin came first the internet came and then Bitcoin, I realized that we were now going to go through an anthropological leap from tribal to global. And so my mission now is to encourage that anthropological leap, to push that forward faster, because I want progress. I believe in progress. I think we should move toward exploring the galaxy, toward seeing how long we can have people live, explore everything, learn everything we possibly can. So I guess that's my Tao.
Yeah.
And I look at money as a resource, and I think people should make money. When you're trying to do good, sometimes people want to do good, but they think they can do it without money, and I think that's a mistake. I think when you have money, you can spread your good word.
Yeah.
around. So go make money. Uh, and have your business, and your business should make money, because then it can do a better job of spreading your service or product around the world. Um, and I think that is critically important. And I'm sure Jack Dorsey believes that too, because he's made a lot of money.
And Vitalik, you know.
And Vitalik, he's
Yeah.
made a lot of money too.
So the second half of the podcast is specifically talking about, career advice. And I just wanted to know, the first question is, what is it like when you get a chance to impact the world? And I was thinking specifically the Hotmail example, because that totally revolutionized how, people are, like, we communicated over email to get this set up. So, yeah.
Well, Hotmail was great. Two young guys came to me, and they said they could create web-based email, and um, and then when they said it was up and ready, then I asked how are they going to market it, and they said, well, we need TV ads and radio and billboards, and we just want it everywhere. And I said, well, wait a second, we don't have the money for that. Why don't you just blast it out to everybody on the internet? And they said, oh no, that would be spamming. I didn't know what spamming was, but I knew that they didn't want to do that. And then I said, well, wait a second, you're going to give away free web-based email to people. You haven't figured out a model. So the least they can do for you is spread it. So I said, why don't you put a little message at the bottom of everybody's email that says, P.S. I love you. Get your free email at Hotmail. And they didn't like it. And I kept pushing, and finally I said, okay, we'll do it, but no P.S. I love you. And so it spread to 11 million users in 18 months. Sabir Bhatia was Indian, and he sent one email to his friend in India, and it spread to 100,000 registered Hotmail users in 3 weeks in India.
Wow.
And at that time, I don't think there were 100,000 computers in India. And now, and so it spread around the world. And I knew from working at HP and international how hard it was to connect with people internationally. And all of a sudden, the whole world just opened up, and we could all communicate for free anywhere around the world. We knew that was something big. And then when Skype came along, we got them to do the same thing, and they made it so that we could do audio and then later video for free around the world. And that has made our lives so much greater, and it has helped the geographic borders dissolve, and it's helped us all just better communications, more peaceful transfers of power, more less nationalism, more globalism. And whereas some government officials are, paranoid about that and trying to pull it all in and become nationalistic, I think they hurt their own country by doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And was there a lot of personal fulfillment for being part of that change?
Oh, yeah. And it actually keeps me going, because I think, wow, we backed those two guys. I came up with that viral marketing idea, and it spread like crazy. And now the whole world can communicate. That's a big deal. And so I think, what else could these entrepreneurs do? And if you look at some of our companies, they are going to be able to do extraordinary things. They can drive healthcare costs way down. They can create new forms of insurance where they pay claims immediately because they have surveillance. They can Bitcoin is a new form of bank that doesn't have friction on it and doesn't require the retailer to pay 2.5% to 4% every time you swipe a credit card. there are many, many more unique, interesting ideas that are constantly coming from people with interesting visions, and they want money to get their business launched. And so I feel like, hey, I've got a mission in life. It's to help these entrepreneurs get to where they need to get.
Yeah. Yeah, well, on Bitcoin, you're wearing the Bitcoin tie, and you're known for being a Bitcoin pioneer, or huge advocate in the very least. Do you mind talking a little bit to our audience about?
I was a pioneer, but I lost it all. I was an early pioneer in Bitcoin. I bought a bunch of it, 40,000 coins or something,
Huh?
and I lost it all to the Mt. Gox fiasco.
There was a hack, yeah.
And then, but it didn't destroy Bitcoin. I thought that was the end of Bitcoin, but it didn't destroy it. And so then I became a big advocate for it.
Yeah.
And then when the Silk Road auction came up, I ended up winning the auction.
Yeah.
Meaning I paid the highest price anybody would pay at that time.
Yeah.
But sure paid off.
Yeah, I mean, you write about that in your book.
Yeah, because I'm still hodling.
Yeah, well, can you talk a little bit for people who aren't fully?
I'm hodling and buying.
Yeah. Well, not everyone in the audience probably is hodling or buying, and do you mind talking to them a little bit about how Bitcoin's probably, you kind of touched on governments, but for students' lives, and just a little bit about your vision behind it.
Okay, well, I'll just give you a few examples. One is when you go spend at retail, you can save 2.5% to 4%. There's number one.
Yeah.
Number two is if you're in Syria and you have a bunch of Syrian money, and then you get the military drives you out and you have to go to Europe. You arrive there and you're a refugee, and nobody takes any Syrian money, so you're just a beggar on the street. Well, if you had Bitcoin, you could go from Syria to Europe, and you could pull down your Bitcoin, buy a house, get started again, go. So that just tells you that Bitcoin is global.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is also open and transparent and keeps perfect records, so that you won't need an accountant.
Yeah.
Or a bookkeeper or an auditor, because it'll all be audited on the blockchain. It'll all be kept. The perfect records are being kept on the blockchain. You won't need to hold your money in a bank. You can hold it on a ledger. Something that looks like that. Looks like. You can hold it on something that looks like that. You can, then if let's say you're Lucasfilm.
Yeah.
And you got to pay 15,000 people every time Star Wars plays. And you have to send out these checks in the mail, and it costs you $7 every time you send out a physical envelope with a check in the mail. $7. Some of those checks are for 22 cents.
Yeah.
We're sending them out for $7. Well, with Bitcoin, you could just, first of all, also, and the people who get those checks do not trust the people who have sent them to them. So there's no trust up and down that line.
Yeah.
If you set it up with a smart contract, which is in effect on the blockchain, you can write software to say, if this happens, then you get this much money.
Sure.
Set it up with a smart contract, and whenever, in fact, you could set it up so that every time anybody paid for any part of that Star Wars movie, those micro payments would all fall into the wallets that they belong into. Yeah. So that you would always, if you're the second lighting director, you will always get the money that you are due from the success of your movie. So it will be a more honest system, a more trustable system. And it's not tied to a government entity. this was Bitcoin was really easy for the Argentinians and the Nigerians to figure out. They're going, well, I don't trust my currency. I don't trust my government currency. So I'll take this. Anything's better than what we've got.
Yeah.
Well, and now the US dollar, the government printed 13 trillion of them. And so people are going, whoa, you mean my dollar is now worth 20% less than it was worth about 3 months ago?
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't happen with Bitcoin. There are only 21 million of them. They are not going to be, they don't print anymore. And so that's why Bitcoin, people say, well, isn't it volatile? Well, no, really, one Bitcoin is still worth one Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's all the other currencies that are very volatile as they slowly disappear from use. So the fiat currencies are slowly disappearing from use as Bitcoin, and it looks like Bitcoin's doing bigger and bigger and bigger. It's just a matter of all the other currencies falling against it.
Yeah, and one of our guests, John McAfee, who's now, kind of in some trouble, he was saying that within 10
Why
years...
is he in trouble?
He's been arrested and he's getting extradited for tax evasion. So not fully sure what's going to happen, but, in terms of the podcast, nice to us. So, all, wishing him the best. But specifically related to Bitcoin, he said within 10 years, banks are not going to exist. For students who are, in college right now, that's probably pretty troublesome because our lives are going to be totally changed, and there isn't, too much of, there isn't too much teaching.
I don't think this is troublesome at all for a student. I mean, this is not your grandfather's currency. This is your currency. I mean, what did your grandfathers and fathers do? What did banks do? They put you $200,000 in debt for going to school.
Yeah.
In some currency that is tied to some government and some banks. I mean, you're walking into a horrible storm.
Yeah.
When you could, that's why it's people like that are coming out of college that are saying, I want something better.
Yeah.
I want a better currency. I want a better system.
Yeah.
This system didn't work for me. I'm coming out. I've just paid $200,000 for schooling and there's no job. There's nothing.
Yeah.
So people are going, whoa, we need something better, something new, something that is more technologically advanced.
Yeah. And by troublesome, I meant they're not teaching it in schools. It's not part of the mandatory, curriculum. And
yeah, that's a joke. And they even took, I learned that in K-12, they even took out the binary math. They took out binary math. They took out the way computers work. They went back in history. So basically schooling has gone backwards. K-12 schooling has gone backwards. And I blame the teachers' unions for that. They have destroyed it. Not the teachers, but the teachers' unions have kept us in the dark ages. And the teachers are doing the best they can, but the unions have just destroyed education.
Sure.
Can you imagine you're going into this? I mean, we're even past the computer age, and they're still not teaching how binary math works.
Yeah.
Yeah. You probably don't even know what I'm talking about. But it's
not super well.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. That's how a computer works. That's how a computer does. That's how a calculator does math for you.
Yeah,
it's all through binary math.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't a math major by any means, so I can't really speak to it. But I will, say okay, let's say me, not a math major, and in college, how do I learn about Bitcoin? How do I become part of this revolution?
I think you just get a wallet, get a Coinbase account. It's not hard. This is not rocket science. You go get a Coinbase account and start you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. You can buy a piece of a Bitcoin. Buy 15 Satoshis, whatever. Just start an account because you're going to want that account. It will not be long before Starbucks laughs at you if you're trying to pay in fiat.
Huh. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll have to see. The other thing, some people on our podcast have alluded to is, and specifically McAfee has said, when you use social media, you yourself are the product. You're getting your data and stuff is being sold to other, organizations. And also we had rapper Lil B on, who was a power user of Twitter, which I think you invested in, right? Twitter.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things, people have been alluding to is that people should be compensated for using social media. And do you think crypto could have any play with that? Like, would there be a Twitter coin or a Facebook coin that you get for just using the platform?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's what Facebook was trying to do, but they got they got mired in government bureaucratic regulation, whatever. But they were trying to do that, and I thought, that maybe Libra would be kind of an interesting token. But now it's probably too late. Now I think it's you don't want a centralized currency at this point. At this point, you want decentralized currency. You want Bitcoin. I don't think you want a currency that's tied to a government or a corporate. I don't think you want one that's centralized anymore. You might want many currencies that are all tied to individual governments and corporations. I like the idea of competition, but clearly you're going to want a currency that is global and open, decentralized, not controlled by any one individual or one group of people. One that's operated on, I mean, there are 100,000 miners all focusing, making sure that the Bitcoin blockchain is secure and right and all that. And there are countless engineers working to improve the experience for Bitcoin. So, I mean, I think it's coming out the winner.
Yeah.
But it's great that there are competitive currencies out there too.
Yeah. Well, just, final two questions. I kind of want to ask, you mentioned that you have, I think it was in your book or one of your interviews where you said you had an instinct to be a venture capitalist, and that may come from your family or whatever. But how do you know as a student if you have an instinct to be a venture capitalist or an entrepreneur?
Well, if you're going to be an entrepreneur as a student, you will just know. It will be in your heart and soul, and you're just going to follow your nose and build on it and grow and figure out how to. Yeah, I mean, at Draper University, we train heroes. We encourage entrepreneurs. People said that entrepreneurship can't be taught. We disagree. I think you can teach entrepreneurship. It has to start with a passion for something. It has to start with, hey, I want to solve something. I want to solve, world hunger. I want to solve cancer. I want to solve big problem. And then it goes to how would I do that? And then how do I productize that? How do I turn that into a product or service?
Yeah.
And then how do I make money in that product or service? And then how do I build the business model that can make that into one of the great companies of the world? That process people have to go through that process.
Yeah.
But if you got a lot of passion, yeah, I think Draper University is a good spot to go.
And venture capitalists.
The Drapers, which is a fun show.
An instinct to be a venture capitalist.
Oh, I guess that more comes from, my dad, my grandfather. I think it's just, I grew up in that business and enjoyed it and saw what it could do for a society and saw how powerful it could be. But I think the instinct comes from experience. But I think you've got to understand people pretty well, and then you can learn markets and technologies. So I think to be a good venture capitalist, you probably, well, you could get lucky and then you'll be a good venture capitalist. But I think you have to have a good head for numbers, and you have to have a good sense of people and what their incentives and motivations are, and you have to be able to read them in a meeting.
Yeah.
But you also have to study technologies so that you kind of you can get them from first principles and see whether this is sort of the next logical step, or is it something way outside, or is it something kind of outside but it's still kind of a logical step. And then is the market ripe for something new?
Yeah.
And that those things come from, the market thing comes from experience. The technology comes from studying, and the people thing comes from socializing, hanging around people.
Yeah.
See when they mean what they say, and see when they don't. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on your show, Jacob. I'm going to have to scoot.
Sure. Well,
And
thank you for your time.
You had some fantastic questions, and I'd be happy to blast it out.
Yeah.
When you send me a link.
Can I ask one last question? You can answer it in a second. You talk a lot about confidence, and I just want to ask, Peter Thiel, when he was a corporate lawyer, said that everyone there hated it and wanted to leave, right? And then eventually he just left, and he ended up becoming Peter Thiel. How do you get that confidence?
Yeah, that I actually think that Peter, he had greater things in his path. That guy's extraordinary, and I think he must have seen more than the average bear or the average lawyer. And I get that the corporate lawyers it's always sort of vicarious for them. And I think that can be, for some people it's great, for some people it's just a horrible existence. And he had the confidence to leave. It could have been just one moment of confidence to get him to leave. It could have been just one thing that just made him angry or ready or vicious enough to move. You can be defined by just one movement. You can just say, I'm leaving, or I'm starting something, or I'm joining something, or I'm whatever. And that one moment can drive a big part of your life.
Hey, well, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for blasting it everywhere. I'll email you it, and thanks for your time. It was a great conversation.
All right, really well.